Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and our guest this evening. My name is Elise Brunel. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Symphony Orchestra and thrilled to have with me Julian Pelicano from Winnipeg. You're in Winnipeg, right?
That's right.
Wonderful. Julian is one of our music director candidates at the Vermont Symphony Orchestra, and we're also thrilled to have him join us on our with probably the most beloved VSO memory for anybody who comes to the concerts. So, Julian, welcome to the Zoom. We're going to chat for about 20, 25 minutes so people get a chance to know you. And we'll go from there. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Great. So, you born and raised in Long Island, I believe, and come from a percussion background, which does make me wonder what is the brand of cymbals you prefer? My brother was a drummer, so I know
Oh,
people take sides.
sure. Uh,
And why don't you walk us through that background and how you ended up in Winnipeg? So that's a long one, but
that's a long
for
story,
it. Yeah.
but well, yes, I am a percussionist, and I grew up playing, starting obviously like most percussionists. We start on the drums, like a real drum set, and that I kind of fell in love with that as a kid, and went on to play lots of different kinds of music, but eventually went into sort of what we would call classical percussion when I went to music school, and that's percussionists who play in orchestras, we play chamber music, um, and of course solo music as well, and sometimes a lot of very avant-garde music because the repertoire for percussionists is not that old. So most of the music that we play has been written in the past 40 to 50 years.
Mm.
And it's constantly evolving, and that's the really cool thing about percussion is that not only is the repertoire always being built, but also the instruments themselves are always new. And to answer your question about cymbals, yes, there's a lot of really fantastic cymbals out there, and I have to say, out of all the percussion instruments, I'm very particular to metal instruments,
Yep.
and I take my cymbals very seriously. And I am a Zildjian person.
Ah, fantastic. All right. Good. We're in the same page now.
Okay, fantastic. Right.
So keep going. What?
Oh, sure.
Cool. Let's go.
So, well, I mean, as a percussionist, I eventually got into conducting, which is a story in itself. A lot of conductors have different ways and, different experiences that sort of lead them to conducting. Mine was very gradual. And really, at its basis, is, I was a bit of a latecomer to orchestral music. And when I
Mhm.
first really came into contact with it in a serious way and in an extensive way when I was at the conservatory for the first time around 18 years old. I just really fell in love with the sound of the orchestra, the repertoire for the orchestra, the history of orchestra, and wanted to get as deep into it as possible. And as a, I was studying with a really well-known timpani player. His name is Jonathan Haas, and he used to have us study the scores to all of the orchestral repertoire that we were studying as timpani players. And of course, the timpani almost never gets the melody. So it's
Mhm.
very important to really know the piece as a whole well. And that was really my first introduction to the orchestral score and really starting to examine all of the other parts that were going on in the orchestra other than just my own part. And eventually it was a bit of a trial by fire. When I was in grad school, I had a conducting assistantship. And when you, as an artist, you kind of feel that something feels right. It just felt really right to me and just sort of went with it. Um, and eventually, I was attempting as a young conductor at the beginning of my career to work with a professional orchestra. And audition in Winnipeg came up, and I was very lucky to win that audition in 2013. And so
Mhm.
I've been here in Winnipeg working with the Winnipeg Symphony as their associate conductor for the past 9 seasons. Next year will be my 10th season.
Fantastic, fantastic. I did read also in your bio, you had a very interesting experience. I'd love to hear about where you were awarded the opportunity to travel and shadow some very noteworthy conductors, Sir Simon Rattle, Daniel
Right.
Barenboim. What was that? That was sounded really interesting, and what an amazing opportunity.
Right. Well, I had some of a lot of my early conducting teachers, as I was sort of studying conducting in the background. I was mainly a percussionist, but I had this interest, and I had a really wonderful teacher, and I studied in Sweden for a couple of years at the Royal
Great.
College of Music in Stockholm. And my teacher, his name was Per Andersberg, and he always said like the best education you will get is to watch other conductors and be in
Mm,
rehearsal. And so for the 2 years I was in Sweden, I spent a lot of time at the Royal Stockholm Philharmonic and also at the Swedish Radio, just being in rehearsal. When I went to Yale to study for graduate school, we were so busy at the School of Music as percussionist and then finally as a conductor that even though it's 90 minutes from New York City, I felt it was almost impossible to really get to New York as much as I wanted to be in rehearsals. And also sometimes rehearsals in big cities and big orchestras can be somewhat closed off. Even as a student,
hmm
it's hard to observe these great conductors that I really wanted to. And so I was awarded the Presser Award by the Dean of the Yale School of Music. And my
mm,
project, I had to come up with the project. And I thought, well, what would I really love to do right now? I would love to continue that course of study I was doing in Sweden, which was observing rehearsals. And wouldn't it be great to just do that all over the world with some of my favorite conductors? And so
that's
I
perfect.
put together a project and it worked out. It was a really an amazing experience.
And not only to travel all over the world, but just to be with the diversity of conductors who have such unique styles, and for you to learn from that as you craft who you are as a conductor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, speaking of you as a conductor, anybody who reads your bio must say, well, what can't he do? Because there's film, there's opera, there's ballet, there's symphonic work, there's chamber work. There is such a breadth of music that you've had experience conducting. And I see, now a strong focus on ballet and on film. To I, I would just love for you to explain what's needed for a conductor who's conducting ballet versus opera versus symphonic work. For somebody who might not know, well, how are the skill sets different for that? Because you do all of them.
Right. Well, I mean, I'd qualify the whole discussion by saying that at the basis of any of these various types of conducting is simply, good conducting and good musicianship,
Hmm
and that's what we strive for, and it's a life's work, right? So hopefully by the time you get to the end, you've learned something. That's how I always feel about it. That it's always your work as a conductor is never done. We're always learning. But
hmm
but certainly the difference between conducting a purely symphonic program versus a piece of theater, which opera or ballet or even a film, which I do
hmm
definitely consider a piece of theater, these are quite different. Um, in a symphonic program, I mean, you're just dealing with the music, and so in some ways, the coaxing the theater out of it and coaxing the sort of I want to say message is not the right word, but that what the music is communicating takes an incredible amount of imagination because it is just the music. Just the music has to be interpreted and performed in a way that holds the attention. A willing collaborator.
mm
So in that sense, you have to be interested in having the music sound the best that it possibly can be, but also with the caveat that when it is synchronized with the choreography, then that's when the real magic happens. And so, to be honest, sometimes it means that you can't always do everything that you might want to do with the music, but there's a
mhm.
higher, sort of bigger goal there.
Yeah.
It's the same with films, actually, because the film, unlike ballet dancers, the film does not change. It is exactly the same every time that you do it, and and it's very, very important that a conductor has the skill and also the interest to actually synchronize the film, because when it's not synchronized, it's just not
Yeah.
as good. It's just
You
it's
can
simply
just
not
you
as
just lose it. We had a similar we had an opportunity here just a few months ago where we had commissioned video projections to be created based on about an hour's long worth of various pieces of music. Um, so whereas and just understanding it, what was so interesting is that I had, for example, had sent a piece of the recorded one of the pieces, Adagio for strings, to the video designer, but I happened to send of a certain pace that our conductor took it much slower. And it was like, oh no, we're running out of video. How do we match that so that when you get to that the climax of that piece, what you're looking at is matching what you hear. So you're right. If you don't get that right, then you shouldn't bother. But
right.
when you do get it right, it is an incredible experience for the audience to see and hear that combination done so perfectly.
Right. Yeah. It's just I mean that is the work of art. It's the
Yeah.
collaboration, and it's the melding of two different art forms to make something that, when they come together, is, heightens the experience in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Let
and
me let
yes.
Speaking of melding and new things, one thing I'm also interested in is the work you've done with the Norfolk Chamber Music Festival and working with a lot of new music. Talk to us a bit about that.
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, as I said before, as a percussionist, you know, we grow up playing lots of contemporary music. And when you're a student, you find that a lot of other students and other composers are writing for percussion, new pieces, adding to the repertoire, and you end up premiering a lot of pieces as a player. And that's something that I did a lot of when I was playing more than I am now, which is not very much at all. Um, and so when I started conducting, sort of my first experiences as a conductor, it was only natural that those same composers that I was working with as a percussionist were now wanting to collaborate with me as a conductor. And so a lot of my really early concerts were in contemporary music. Part of that was part of my training was at the Yale School of Music, and they have a really robust composition program with a lot of opportunities for performances. And our roles as conducting students, it's a very small program. Only two conductors are really accepted in the program at any given time. And one of the things that we did when I was a student was we were responsible for conducting on a series called New Music, New Haven. And it was primarily a concert series of 8 concerts where composition students could freely write for an ensemble and have their works performed. And us conducting students were mostly responsible for conducting these works. And so there was a lot of opportunity to conduct new pieces. Through that experience, I was asked to be the conductor for a new music workshop at the Norfolk Chamber Festival, which is run by the Yale School of Music, collaborating with composer Martin Bresnik, who's a great friend and colleague of mine, and his wife, the pianist Lisa Moore, the former pianist of the Bang on a Can All-Stars. 2 really wonderful people with tons of experience. And the purpose of the program is to bring some of the really most talented young composers around college age, sort of pre-grad school, to Norfolk, and they write a completely new piece for a totally unusual ensemble. And every year the ensemble's slightly
Like
different.
what? Give me a bassoon.
Yeah, it'll be, so we like a classic ensemble that we've had a couple of times is violin, double bass, trombone, clarinet, piano, and percussion, something like that. So it's the kind of ensemble that, well, one of the great things about the ensemble is that we're almost guaranteed that no one has written a piece for this group, so
Yeah.
they have to write a new piece. And
That's smart thinking. So we're not going to riff on anything we know out there because it's not out there.
right, it's not
That's
out
great.
there. And the cool thing about the workshop is that the players in the ensemble also they also apply to come into the ensemble. Everything is sort of paid for, and we come in, and these are players who are really interested in new music, really interested in working with composers. And what we do is basically we get the pieces, we play them through, and then that usually happens on like a Wednesday or a Thursday. And then for the next week, the composers might have a completely new set of parts every day. And so we come in and we play from new parts and we work on it and we have feedback and we have comments and there are lectures and seminars. And Martin works with young composers and I work with them and they talk to the players. And the concert and recording is usually on a Friday. And we say, okay, by Wednesday before we need the final version. But it's really unique in experience for composers to get that opportunity to experiment and to learn and to try different things with an ensemble. And
Wonderful.
Doing it since 2008, it's been a really wonderful part of my career. And unfortunately, because of COVID, it was sidelined for a few years, but can't wait to get back to it.
Great. Good to hear about that. So let's do the conversation towards the Green Mountain State, Vermont. You're coming here. You have not conducted here before, but you have definitely visited a few times. Yes?
Yes, I have visited a few times. I have skied in Vermont.
You have skied in Vermont. I shouldn't say this, but I haven't yet. So you're one ahead of me, and I got to work on it. So you're joining us for Summer Festival Tour. There's definitely the familiar favorites. There's Sousa, there's Williams, there's Bernstein. How do you keep the old standards fresh when everyone's heard them a million times and it might even be 90 degrees out and you're literally about to melt on the stage? But how do you come into a summer pops with some standards? We'll talk about the non-standard music in a bit, but how do you approach that?
Well, I think that no matter whether a piece is standard or not, the imperative is always to choose great music, right? And so these are pieces, if you're choosing pieces that people have heard many times, it's usually because it's worthwhile to hear them one more time. They're that good. And I always feel that, programming any kind of a concert, but especially a concert that has like a sort of more popular concert like the one we're doing on the summer tour, which has so many different pieces, it's really important how you juxtapose the pieces and in what order you put them in. And if you're going to have some familiar pieces, then you also have to have some unfamiliar pieces to put them into contrast with or to complement. And so I think that the overall programming is one way to do that. The other way is that, these, like I said before, the pieces are really wonderful. And the great thing about a wonderful piece of music, a really, really masterpiece, is that every time you look at it, you seem to find something new. And so that's certainly what I found with all of the pieces on this program, which I've conducted before and which I'm sure the audience has heard before.
But let's talk about now the ones they haven't heard before. Right. Who is Quinn Mason? Tell us about Quinn.
Quinn is an extraordinarily talented young American composer. He is also a conductor, and his works are really being performed all over at the moment. He has a musical sensibility for orchestration that's very rare in a young composer. And so the piece that we're playing by Quinn is one movement from his piece called A Joyful Trilogy. And I wanted to find a piece that just sparkled, that just presented, the tour is called Celebration, right? Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to find that spark of joy, that one piece that really encapsulates how we feel to be back, and obviously for the musicians as well, to be back on tour. And this piece does that. It is the musical. He describes it as music, which is it's like a buzzing joy, the most joy you've ever felt put into music. And he's done this. The music runs. It has a forward energy and a sense of sparkle that is kind of like, if you're familiar with Respighi's Pines of Rome.
Yes, of course.
It has that feeling to it. That's sort of that tingling. And I can just say that I don't know Quinn personally, but he's obviously extraordinarily talented, and we're really looking forward to presenting the piece.
Last summer, we had a concert as well that had a piece that I think no one in Vermont perhaps had heard, by Milad Yusufi, called Freedom. And it was also one of those, you felt his love and his celebration of freedom. And it's wonderful to be able to present those young new voices, especially when, pops can be a little prescriptive, I know, but to find the music that can fit that and complement what we already know. So are there any other composers or any other pieces that you'd like to point out for this coming tour?
Oh, sure. Well, we're playing some music by Florence Price.
Hmm.
Florence Price, for anyone who doesn't know, is a American composer from the first half of the 20th century. She was a contemporary of Gershwin, slightly older than Gershwin. She's the first African American female composer to ever have a piece performed by a major orchestra. One of her symphonies was performed by the Chicago Symphony, and unfortunately, it's really unfortunate that, for most of the 20th century, her work was almost completely unknown, except to a few specialists who sought out her work. And in fact, a lot of it was lost and only rediscovered I believe, in the 1990s.
Hmm.
So now we're starting to understand the breadth of her work, the depth of her work, the craft and skill of what she has composed, and suddenly we're able to hear it both in recordings and also in live performances. She composed many different works in many different genres, and we're presenting two of the movements from her Dances in the Cane Breaks. A lot of her work is influenced by African American spirituals and dances, and these two pieces are no different, and they're just very charming, really beautiful pieces that are distinctively American, distinctively Florence Price, and they're really going to be a wonderful addition to this program.
Great. Cool. Well,
Yes.
the only other question I have for you, and I mentioned at the beginning before we zoomed, I'm going to ask you a surprise question. And someone asked me this my first week of moving to Vermont, and luckily I had a place down the road that sold these things, and I had tried one, so it was okay. But my question for you is, what is your favorite creamy flavor? Which of course would mean, do you know what a creamy is?
I I don't know what a creamy is, but I'm just going to say maple.
Oh, of course. Could it be anything else? It's soft ice cream here. But
Yeah.
somebody asked me, oh, where's your favorite place to get creamies? And I happen to live about 4 blocks away from a very famous place called Al's. And I'm like, oh, of course, Al's. Don't ask me anything else. Now you know, when you come, you'll have to have a maple creamy at Al's.
Okay, I will seek out Al's.
Fantastic.
Get a maple
Good.
specifically.
Well, we
Thank you
so look forward to having you come just in a little over about a week and a bit. Come to Vermont and look forward to meeting you. And I know the musicians can't wait to meet you and work with you and all of the audiences in Vermont.
The feeling is mutual. I can't wait to get to Vermont and perform for our audiences and also meet the orchestra. So thank you so much.
Great. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.